Okay. Now we're going to talk about what you need to do this week. Why do you even bother to have roles and titles and all on a team? Now, this is, yeah, let's go to the resume actually. Push for those titles. I've actually been somewhat amused. My daughter Crystal, who lives every virtual all the time, works up at worked hard for about 3.5 years to get the title of senior software engineer. And I thought, oh, I had that within a couple of years, but it's mostly because I kept changing companies every year. But yes, titles do look good on it. Now, the idea why within, you're on a 3-month project here. Why do you have roles and titles? One of the biggest problems I see with projects in this class is work falling through the cracks. Stuff that everyone thinks someone else is doing, or someone else is responsible for. And you get to a certain point, it's like, okay, now we need to bring in the art, and everyone looks at each other and says, what art? What graphics? What user interface? So this is a teaching experience. To be honest, if you have just 2 or 3 people working on a project, you don't need titles. A lot of my work for the first several years out of college was I was the sole or chief programmer and maybe had some help from a few other people, and I didn't really worry about those titles here, though I did have titles at the companies I was at. At Oasis Systems / FTL Games, I was Vice President of Research and Development. Still looks great 35 years later. We were a little hole-in-the-wall software company, though a very successful and profitable one. And so we're back to the it looks good on a resume. But the issues here are tasks falling through and uncertain authority or gatekeeping. Who is responsible for making that decision? And one of the most important things that you can do in defining your team and your roles and responsibilities is making it clear for each aspect who actually has gatekeeping authority, who can say, yes, this is the way we're doing it. Or I'm not going to accept it until you've done it this way, and then you can have fist fights later. But in real world, issues of prestige and ego, you may not want to get certain role titles because you have lack of talent, skill, or interest in them. You can actually have misused authority. Now, your team can take whatever approach you want as far as how I want to do roles and responsibilities, but I need an org chart and I need a roles and responsibility document. And it can be on the same wiki page. All your deliverables will need to be posted onto your wiki page. They will need to be public. If you have serious thoughts that we're doing this and we're going to take this, we're actually going to proceed with business with this, you can keep your source code private. I don't care about that. Because your source code is never deliverable to me. It's all your other stuff that your team will have to do, and you're going to basically have a set of 6 deliverables in the next 6 weeks. So you don't have a lot of time to think about this and debate it. So, why have an organization chart? Figure out the division of labor, focus on individuals' talents, skills, and interests, make responsibilities clear, establish lines of communication. You have 2 articles in your Webster 2 reading that actually will apply to your organization stuff, so it's good to read those early. We'll talk about it next week. One is Conway's Law. That's a term coined by Fred Brooks in Mythical Man Month after a friend of his, who says, the architecture of a system under development reflects the communication structure of the team developing it. Whether or not that's what it's supposed to do, that's what it will do. And so, what you want to do is to organize your team to reflect what you expect your architecture is going to be. Now, in this case, you're defining the org chart first, and you're going to define your architecture in a week or 2. And at that point, you may want to change your team organization to reflect it. This is not an all at once. good organizations will change up on a regular basis. You'll reassign, I mean, it depends on how long-term the project is, what phase it's in, and so on. But you will reassign roles based on what's going on. An org chart is also tied into aligning individual goals with team goals. Again, when you read, we'll read this article next week. This was something else we did at Pages that made a tremendous difference with the team issues we had. I'll talk about it next week. You can read the article this week. But the real true answer of why I have an organization chart is it's required for the class. Okay, challenges in organizing a team. Deciding how you're going to decide the roles. This is a challenge. It will be an interesting, watch yourselves in terms of group dynamics as you start to talk about who's going to do what. And notice how people act and react. And things overt and subtle they do to try and sort of leverage for the role they want or the title they want. I had a teacher back in high school who said one of his favorite forms of entertainment is when he got in an elevator somewhere, he'd wait for the doors to close, then he'd step just a little too close to someone else in the elevator. And he said that person would shift, and then someone else would shift. He said if it was a really crowded elevator, he'd get everyone shifting. And it would finally settle into a steady state, and then he'd... if the doors hadn't opened yet. You will find, this is actually one of your off-the-bat challenges. My recommendation is recognize that roles can and they will change during the course of the thing. And this is a learning experience. This isn't a job. This isn't going on a business card, unless you really want to print business cards. A lot of it is that you don't know necessarily what you need yet. So part of your organization is going to be having to do some brainstorming about your project as it's currently ill-defined. And saying, okay, we're going to need someone to do this, someone to do this, someone to do this, someone to do this. And start asking for volunteers. Prestige jobs. There's an old joke about how do you conjugate the verb to code. It's I architect, you program, he or she tests. There is, in the real world, a hierarchy. Architects have the prestige, regular developers are after that, quality assurance is after that. The irony is the quality assurance people are the most important people. But as we'll talk about, it is where companies penny pinch the most. And it's why you have billions of dollars of failed software projects every year. Available talents and skills don't always match required positions. What if your team is doing a game that requires artwork and you discover no one on your team really has any graphical design experience or animation experience? It's kind of like, okay, who's gonna fill this cap? I'm sorry?
Well, there's public accessible.
Yeah, there are public. You can find solutions to it, but my point is that you may discover that you have things that for the projects you want to do may require talents or skills that you're generally not lacking. And this is another time for me to raise my hand and say, these projects are not a good place to decide to learn some brand new technology. You're welcome to do it. Again, you don't get graded on how good your demo is. It's just you show up and do a demo. And there have been some very shaky and simple demos. But your last assignment in the class, which is due on the last day of the semester, is you go to Learning Suite and you write a 2 or 3 paragraph post-mortem of your experiences. And one of the biggest themes is, I wish we hadn't decided to all learn X for this project. Whether that's Unity or Swift or iOS or whatever. You have a lot of teams that say, oh, this is a great chance for us to learn to use this new technology. And guess what? You spend the entire semester learning that new technology. and going through that learning curve. And in theory that might help you later on, but you end up with a demo that's like a box and a few stick figures. Yeah.
What do you do when there's not a large intersection of?
That's actually a very real problem. That's one of your challenges. I assume you're not a large intersection of skills.
Yeah,
like
so
you've got
somebody has to learn
you've
something.
got iOS and you've got
Yeah.
this is Android, and you've got someone with great C++ skills, and you've got someone who's knows the Unity engine forward and backward. That's a good question, and you're going to have to figure out how to divide up the roles and figure out where to plug people in and what's the sort of maximum viable set of skills that you've got, and then figure out where you're going to sort of paste people in on the outside. But don't forget that you can reorganize and reassign at any time. You may change your mind. Org charts, these are examples of org charts from previous. This is what I'm looking for an org chart. Boxes, names, titles, arrows. You will be seeing org charts for the next 40 or 50 years. So figure out who's managing whom, who's communicating with whom. A two-way arrow means that they're more or less peers. A one-way arrow indicates A is managing B. So I'll have these slides up. And by the way, let me state again, I've already said this once before, Jerry Weinberg, just passed away, bless his heart. I've had the privilege of communicating with him off and on for the years. In fact, I think he, on my post on the thermocline of truth that you're going to read later this semester, he actually came in and made some contradictory comments, and I turned around and responded and said, Jerry, it's great to hear from you, and let me tell you why you're wrong. I have literally probably 8 or 9 books by Jerry Weinberg. His oldest book, which I would have you read, except it's very thick, and a lot of it is archaic, but it's still extremely up to date, is The Psychology of Computer Programming. She wrote in 1971. And if you get past the stuff about punch cards and everything else, you're going to say, oh my gosh, they had all the same problems 50 years ago. Jerry Weinberg talks about the fact that creativity, he says there are 3 things that, as kids we're generally taught to avoid. Making mistakes, stealing stuff, and copulating. He says that's the source of all ideas. You steal, you make mistakes, and you join things together that weren't joined together before. That was actually our unofficial motto at Team Bonsai, error, theft, and copulation. There are, all the wikis from all the previous semesters are up on the wiki site. Feel perfectly free to go browsing through and look at their org charts, look at their documents, steal them, adapt them. There are some good examples, there are some bad examples, and you'll have to decide which are which. But don't feel like you have to start from scratch. I mentioned that reuse was a big issue in the 90s, and as it turned out, code reuse was largely a bust. We had this big, I was helping to mentor this big reuse project at Fannie Mae. And I spent a year and a half trying to come up with a, how many of you know what Fannie Mae does? Fannie Mae is actually a publicly traded, though I think their stock was delisted because they did some really bad things accounting-wise. But they were set up by the government many years ago to encourage home ownership. And they did this. Fannie Mae would go to banks and buy mortgages. So now the bank no longer had the mortgage to service, and it now had cash. So it could go loan more money. Fannie Mae would then service the mortgage, and you would actually be making your mortgage payments to Fannie Mae. And then Fannie Mae would bundle these into mortgage-backed securities and put them out on Wall Street to get more money to buy more mortgages and so on and so forth. So the quintessential object at Fannie Mae is the loan, the mortgage loan, the house loan. So they decided they have all these different systems And they're slowly migrating to object technology. This is the mid-90s. And they want to have a single standard loan object. So they had this big reuse initiative in-house, and as the senior consultant there from OSG, I was the one mentoring them. They came up with a loan object that had, I don't know, 100 to 150 methods in several hundred fields. And was totally unusable. And part of the problem is that all of software is about abstraction. And as it turned out, all these different systems had different abstractions of what a loan was. And when you try to glom them all together, it's like something out of Lovecraft. It's this giant tentacular mass with arms waving all over. What we found was that the single most valuable set of reusable objects were shell scripts. People were submitting shell scripts they'd written to do different things on different systems. Everyone's like, oh, hey, there's a shell script that does this. I'll use that. That was vastly more reusable than any of the code that anyone ever produced. So, deliverables are highly reusable. Feel free to reuse them. It'll make your lives easier. Possible roles and titles. I do want a project manager. I do want a chief architect. Those have to be two different people. Few of you have like 3 people, so we already know what two of the titles are. And you can figure out whatever the third person's going to be called. Those are just some ideas there. And of course, there are a number of websites like this. And what's scary about this is that this is actually very true to life if you go to Silicon Valley. So let me move this over. All right, here's my message. Now, here we go. Over here. How many of you have done internships in Silicon Valley? Anyone? These titles are real, aren't they? Have you seen these? I mean, not these specifically, but no, you will actually see titles like this all the time in Silicon Valley. It's like people want to come up with their. So you're free to use those, but you still need to indicate who's the project manager and who's the chief architect. Okay. Besides you, there we go. Along with the org chart, I want roles and responsibilities, so I can put them on the same wiki page. You can create a wiki page, put the org chart there, and then just put this as text below it. And this is for each of the titles in your org chart. What are the responsibilities? What is that person doing? This is in part so that you yourselves know, you actually have written down who's responsible for what. I didn't originally require this, and then I found people were creating org charts and then had no clue who on their team was actually doing certain things. And once again, you had stuff falling into the cracks. For smaller teams, a given person may have multiple roles. And, you can go look. Like I said, look at the other wikis, and I'll have the slides up hopefully tonight, and you can go through and do that. It doesn't have to be a long document, but just for each title, as you have a word chart, have what the roles and responsibilities are for that role. Okay. Now, this is something also new that I introduced a year ago, fall 2018. Weekly status report. Now, originally what I had was that each person was responsible for logging their billable hours on Learning Suite, and that became a pain to track, and it also didn't provide a lot of visibility within the team. Plus, how many of you have actually worked on projects where status reports are required, weekly or otherwise? Okay. Well, this is good training for the real world. What you're going to need to do is fill out, your team will need to fill out a status report. The project manager is responsible. The project manager can assign someone else to do it, part of your roles and responsibilities. I mean, make sure the person wants to do it, but anyway, and these need to be posted on your wiki page, and I need a separate dated link for each one. I've had in times past people say, well, we're just using different tabs on the same Google Docs spreadsheets. Like, no, I don't want to paste through your tabs. I want a separate link that says, you know, here's December, or here's September 28th. Here is, you know, October 4th. Here is this. I can click on it, and there's the spreadsheet. The template is an Excel template. It is, and if you want to convert that to Google Docs, you're fine. But I just need a separate link for each one. Here's what it looks like. This is licensed. I got this from a IT management website in India. Well, a whole collection of documents. But did so primarily to get this. So, your project name. The current date, I have, please don't leave the same date in there week after week. First, it makes me suspicious of whether or not how much you've actually updated the status report, but also makes it hard to tell what week it's supposed to be related to. So this is the date. Here's the person who has the role of project manager. This should just be, and this is all on the next slide, a summary of what you're trying to do. And as will happen for a number of you, halfway through, you're going to say, well, you know, really can't do this, we're going to do this instead. Okay? In that case, update it here. These should be key tasks that are currently being worked on. How far along they are, well, of course, we'll talk about the 90% fallacy. What the status is, and your estimated finish date for those tasks. I want this updated each week. The report should talk, now, if a task is completed, you pull it off of this list here, and you put it over here for that status report. Say, we completed this week. Here are any tasks that we actually thought we were getting done, but they're now delayed. Because we're waiting on something, or ran into a problem, or whatever. And here are tasks, this is what we plan to focus on for the coming week. So, here's what we completed last week. Here's anything that's got pushed off. Here's stuff for the next week. Team members, billable hours. Billable hours, basically any time you spend on the project. Team meetings, sitting, thinking great thoughts, jotting stuff down, actually producing deliverables, working on code, working on documents, whatever. I don't have any minimum on billable hours because it's going to go up and down depending on your role and where your project is at and so on. On the other hand, all your team members are going to see this and know who is actually putting in time on the project and who isn't. I'm also going to see it. And if I keep seeing, you know, 77650, you're going to hear from me or from Taylor, and I'm going to ask, why aren't you putting any time in on this? And it can impact your grade. Over here, track any current, and some of these may live for the whole project, but any current risks or issues that you're dealing with. This is a good thing to get. Risk management is very important in software engineering. A lot of companies do a very poor job of it, or they don't want to hear it. So this is where you raise risks and say, you know, here's a big problem we face. We're not sure how we're going to solve that. Yeah.
What if you're like assigned to a couple tasks and you efficiently complete those, you know? And so your billable hours are somewhat lower than your other team member?
That's fine, as long as, basically, Taylor and or I will talk with each project manager, well, chat probably, with each project manager each week. And if the project manager is happy with what you're accomplishing, we're happy. If the project manager is covering for you, then that's actually good practice for the real world. Cover for your team. If your project manager is unhappy with you, we will hear about it. So, this is an Excel spreadsheet. There's a link on the class website, there's a link from these slides somewhere. There we go. Here's the link. So this is just the stuff I just told you, so I don't need to go through that again. First one's due this Saturday. Obviously, you're not going to have much in the way of billable hours beyond whatever team meetings you do to try and decide, you know, who has what roles. But it's a good chance to start thinking, what are our tasks? Now, your next task after this is going to be requirements? Yes. Next week, we're going to talk about requirements and doing a requirements document for your project. So that's going to be a task that you can get started on. Again, post a status report on your team wiki with separate code entry. Now, my recommendation is your billable hours are Saturday through Friday, because this is due on midnight Saturday. What you don't want are people, you know, getting to you at 11:30 p.m. Saturday night saying, "Oh, I have 7 hours for the week." So just say midnight Saturday. With everyone has to have their hours into you by noon on, or midnight Friday. Everyone has to have their hours in by noon on Saturday. And it gives whoever's putting a report together plenty of time to get it there and posted. If someone fails to report or get to you, and by the way, it is on your responsibility to contact whoever is, you know, in charge of the report, whether that's a project manager or someone else, and say, "Here's my hours for the week." If there's nothing there, you can mark it as a 0 or NR for no report. No requirement, but if there is a clear issue of lack of participation, that's feedback I'm getting from the rest of the team, the grade could be lowered, you could even fail the class. Just so you know. Okay, for next week, for this week, by Saturday, create your org chart, roles and responsibility, put that up on the wiki page, create your first status report, put that on your wiki page. Another podcast by midnight. If you missed deadlines on podcasts or readings, just DM me on Slack. I tend to be relatively generous because, frankly, I am vastly more interested in you actually reading and listening to this stuff than anything. If you're chronic, I may start to ding you. But as long as you're actually doing it, that's mostly what I care about. I just want you to read this stuff. Okay? Next week we'll be on project requirements. We have Mythical Man, Chapter 10, Accelerate Chapter 8, Webster Chapter 2, which I noted already. It's 3 posts, and I already cited 2 of them in these slides. 2 are more relevant to this week's task, so you may want to get started on those early. So that's actually not a lot of reading for this week. And any questions at this point on any of this? Everyone's really anxious to get out of here.